A Feast of Crows by George R.R. Martin was released in 2005 and follows directly after the events of the War of the Five Kings, as the kingdom is in a state of disarray and Cersei has to deal with her relationship with her brother, as well as some new religious zealots that have entered into King's Landing that are threatening to take down the kingdom. Oh, while this is going on, Brienne of Tarth is on her own mission in search of Sansa Stark, who is in hiding with Littlefinger. There's a lot going on, there's a lot at stake, and this book in particular is a very interesting one when it comes to the entirety of the Song of Ice and Fire series. For those of you that don't know, A Feast for Crows only tells half of one complete story. The events of A Dance with Dragons also take place during the events of this book, and George R.R. Martin, instead of splitting a book in half, decided to separate storylines by geography. So in this book, we get characters such as Cersei, Jaime, Sansa, Brienne, Sam, and a bunch of others. But we don't get some other mainstays such as Tyrion, Daenerys, and Jon Snow. And this is a piece of contention for a lot of people, which makes A Feast for Crows, for some people, the worst book in A Song of Ice and Fire. And that's not to say that the book is bad, it's just not as good as some of the books that came before it, such as A Game of Thrones and A Storm of Swords. However, I think that this is a very underrated book, and many of the complaints I do understand, and I will say that this isn't one of the absolute best books in the series, but there's a lot here that I think people are really missing out on and forgetting about. One thing that I think that this book does perfectly, and I think is the best at doing it, is character. This is a very character-driven story, focusing on just a handful of characters, not as many as you would have thought, and it really makes this story in particular feel rather small. And you know what? I'm okay with that. It feels on the scale of the first book, which I think is really great, especially after the big climax that we had with the previous book. But in here, we get to focus on one particular character, and that is Cersei, who is a new POV character for this book, and she is the best character that George R.R. Martin has ever written. This character is so intriguing, so conniving, and so complex, and her character chapters in particular are so amazing to read. This is a vile human being, but does have some depth to her that makes her very compelling all the same. I love the stuff with Cersei in this book and what she has to deal with during this really interesting time in the Seven Kingdoms. I also really like seeing Jaime's characters as we see this split between him and Cersei beginning to tear them apart, and I think it's wonderfully done here. He is constantly thinking about that, and the more the story goes along, the more they are torn apart. And it really develops his character in a fantastic way. I love those two in particular, but I also love other stuff that's going on during this time. Definitely some more political things, such as the stuff going on with Sansa Stark and Littlefinger, as Littlefinger is trying to make her a big deal in the Eyrie, and that stuff is just fantastic. The one weak link in the chapters, I might say, is probably Brienne's storyline. I really do like Brienne's storyline, and I love her character. However, it really feels like she's just kind of going from one place to the other, asking the same questions over and over, and just kind of running in circles. It's not the most engaging reading. But the stuff that I really think, honestly, is kind of underrated and some people don't necessarily love is the stuff with Dorne. This is a very interesting culture and very interesting characters that ends with quite the banger at the very end with a nice little twist at the end that's just so great. I thought it was really engaging stuff, and I thought really everything in this was extremely engaging and wasn't at all what I was expecting, because I kind of bought into how people felt about this book, which was saying that, it's probably the worst of A Song of Ice and Fire, but I still think this is a great book. I would honestly put this way above A Clash of Kings, which is my least favorite of these books. But I think the character work in this book is superb and what makes it stand out. Now, the stuff that doesn't necessarily work in this book, yes, it's a character-focused book, and so in that way, you don't get much plot going on. There's definitely more plot in the next book, A Dance with Dragons, but that's not necessarily a bad thing that there's not a lot of plot going on here, because the characters are definitely the heart of this story. And also, I will say that some character stories are more interesting than others. As I said, Brienne's storyline isn't my absolute favorite, but it is still very good nonetheless. And then also there's, just some characters that you definitely feel are missing from this story, such as Jon Snow and Tyrion, which of course show up in the next book. And so it makes this book definitely feel less and a lot smaller, but again, I do kind of like that. I think because it doesn't have certain characters in it, that it does feel less complete in that sense, even though we are, in a sense, getting a complete story with the characters we are given. But still, in the end, I think A Feast for Crows is a very underrated book. It's a great book. It's a great read. I was thoroughly entertained, and I loved the character depth with these characters. I loved Cersei's storyline. I loved reading her chapters, and it was extremely engaging, definitely better than A Clash of Kings. So anyway, with all that said, I'm going to give A Feast for Crows an 8 out of 10. Well guys, I want to thank you for watching this review. I hope you enjoyed it. I will be reviewing A Dance with Dragons sometime soon, once I get through the last 200 or so pages. But anyway, thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next review.